is up, my britches? If you are new here, hello, my name is Brittany. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking all of the palettes in my collection that I consider to be neutral eyeshadow palettes. There's 26. So for these palettes, whenever I look at them, I just immediately think neutral, whether they're warm tone, whether they're cool tone. Some of them may have pops of color, but I feel like a lot of these really do stay in the brown family. So I just thought this would be a fun video because you guys know I love a basic ass color story. And then as soon as I added this video to my list, I thought to myself, what other creators do I know that love a basic bitch color story just as much as I do? And I immediately thought of Morgan Turner. Guys, Morgan Turner has been one of my favorite channels of 2020 as well. I've been collabing with a lot of people this month. You guys have seen during BRITCHES, but I just love showcasing channels that I love. And Morgan loves the finer things in life. I feel like she focuses a lot on luxury, but she has a really great variety of products that she incorporates into her channel, and she considers herself to be a product knowledge enthusiast, and she is also a makeup artist. But I love her videos. She does ranking videos all the time now. She just does all the sort of content that I like to watch, as all of these people do that you see me collab with. But I just think she's so sweet and so kind, and I just really want to publicly thank her and Jose, her husband, so much, because you guys have seen, like, the evolution of my live stream game probably changed dramatically throughout 2020, and I really want to thank them both for being so incredibly helpful for all the feedback that they gave me throughout figuring out my entire process. So shout out to Jose and Morgan for both helping me, and I'm so grateful for the friendship that I've built with Morgan. I'd love to get to know her even more, but I'd love for you guys to please go over and subscribe to her channel because she's just so sweet. I just love her. She just makes me smile. I don't know, she's just all about the makeup. She loves her some makeup, and I love the fact that her and her mom both love makeup too. So definitely go check out Morgan's video because she is going to be ranking her neutral palettes as well because, again, we both love a basic ass color story, okay? There's nothing wrong with some boring ass eyeshadow palettes because I think that neutral palettes look the best on me.
That's just me and my humble opinion.
But I'm just gonna dive right in because we got a lot of palettes to go through. So again, please go subscribe to Morgan's channel and let's jump into all of these eyeshadows that I'm going to be ranking from worst to best in my entire collection. Now, starting with the worst, okay, guys, don't come for me, okay? I know people love this brand, but this was just a miss palette for me. I ranked the Juvia's Place, the Taupes palette, in last place in my collection. I just think for this color story, it just doesn't have enough depth for me, and I just never find myself reaching for it. I think Juvia's Place does make excellent eyeshadows, but the color story really has to wow me to make me continuously reach for it. I do find a lot of the times, like, I initially am really excited about Juvia's Place palettes, but then I notice the more and more that I do my makeup, I don't really reach for them that much. It doesn't help that I'm always bringing in new stuff in my collection as well, but I just think these are a great price if the color story speaks to you, but this one for me was just a dud amongst all the ones that I tried this year, so this one, unfortunately, did rank last for me in 2020. And then the next palette is going to be the COLLAB Makeup, the Palette Pro eyeshadow palette in the shade Get Ready With Me. I just think this is a cute color story, but the quality of the shadows is not the bomb.com. I don't even know if this is available anymore. There's a lot of confusion, like if COLLAB still exists. I did get this at Sally Beauty. I can't remember if this was gifted to me or if I did purchase this. I'm pretty sure I did purchase this, but I have gotten PR from Sally Beauty before. But I'm like, okay, the palette's cute, the color story's cute, it's a basic ass color story. I don't know, I guess I just have a really hard time finding affordable eyeshadows that are actually incredible quality. So this one did rank lower for me. I think there's 4 other color stories, maybe more at this time, but I don't ever reach for it. This will probably actually get decluttered when I do my eyeshadow palette declutter, which should be coming soon, so stay tuned for that. And then the next palette I have in here is the Maybelline, the 24K Nudes. I just think this is fine. I love the color story of this because it does lean more cool tone. I just don't love the formula of these. But for this one, I will hang on to it just because it's one of the first palettes that my husband ever bought for me. So when I saw this, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. The color story looks super cute. But the formula just was a miss for me. And unfortunately, that's gonna rank fairly low. Now this next one, I think everybody was expecting me to rank this a lot lower, but the Tati Beauty, the Textured Neutrals Volume 1. First of all, the mirror in this palette is incredible. But this, I just was not a fan of this formula, but I found that a lot of people either love this palette or hate it. For me, what saves this palette in my collection are the glitters on the top row. I think that top row is incredible. For me, those glitters, if you like pressed glitters, they do justify the price because I think that they look incredible on the eyes. It's just everything else I felt like was really lackluster. I do feel like you can get good looks using this. It's just gonna take you an eternity to get there. And that for me, I just can't be bothered. So for me, this missed the mark. I think the black is insanely pigmented, except it feels like it fades away too quickly. So overall, I just wasn't really a fan of basically the metallics, the sequins, and the mattes, but the glitters I thought were incredible. But I love the structure of this as well. I think the structure was so smart because it makes it really easy to kind of figure out what you want to use. I really do enjoy the visual appeal of this palette. It's just the glitters are what stand out to me. So I think the glitters are phenomenal, but everything else I'm just like, meh. The next palette is from Il Makiage. This is the Rico Nasty palette. I think this packaging is so cute. This palette could honestly be a weapon because it is heavy. So this palette for me, it's got the pops of colors, but it still feels very neutral to me. I found that I don't really reach for this palette because the shadows are very dense. They kind of remind me of like a more dense version of Natasha Denona. But this ranks lower just because I feel like it is one of those palettes that it does take you a little bit more time to get a decent look. I feel like it does take you a little bit of time, but I did really like this when I first used it. I love this purple shade right here. But again, when I look at this palette, I think neutral, but it's got those fun pops of colors as well. And the packaging is stunning. I love the packaging. It's totally my vibe. I think this is awesome, but it's just more or less the formula for me that kind of shuns me away because there's other formulas in my collection that I just prefer over this one. So that's really the only reason why I rank this lower. I mean, it's fine. I've gotten really pretty looks out of it, but I just don't find myself reaching for it that often. The next palette is actually what I wore on my wedding day. This is the Too Faced Semi-Sweet Chocolate Bar palette. I just hang on to this for just nostalgia reasons. I will one day put this in a shadow box, like when we have our closet all finished, because I do want to have like a whole wedding section in my closet. So this palette, I don't ever reach for it anymore, but it still has that very sentimental place in my heart, you know what I mean? So this one, I don't have much to say about it because it's been so long since I've used it, but I just like this color story. I think it's pretty, and my husband did request, like, when I asked him what type of makeup he'd like to see on me, he wanted me to be very natural for our wedding day, and I felt like this really nailed it for what I was looking for. It's very subtle, but I feel like you have a really good variety. You've got the darker browns, you've got a little bit of warmth, you have some coolness in here. This is just a really well-rounded palette in my opinion. This palette for me, I think I would still use it if it didn't have that sentimental value behind it, but I just haven't touched it since my wedding because it just holds a very special place in my heart. So this one, it just kind of hangs out in my collection. Would I run out and repurchase this though? No, because there's other formulas that I just prefer over this one, and the packaging isn't my favorite either. Like, it's very, like, it's tin, but it's very flimsy, so that's one thing that I don't love about it either. The next palette, I used to love this palette. Oh my gosh, this was one of my favorite neutral palettes back in the day. This is the Tarte Tartlet in Bloom palette. I used to use the shit out of this, especially when I did freelance once upon a time. I thought this was such a great neutral color story. The formula was fantastic, but I just have found over the years that there's other formulas that I prefer. I still think that this is a bomb palette though. Like, if this color story speaks to you, especially for basically like if you have a day job or something like that, if you need something to just make you look a little bit more put together, I still think that this is a great palette. Like, the packaging's nice, it's got the mirror in here, it's got the pops of shimmers and stuff like that. For what I look for, would I buy this again today? Probably not, because I really like really shiny metallics, and this one they have more of metallics that reflect more of like a shimmer, if that makes sense. So this palette, it was one of my favorites back in the day, but over time my preferences have changed. But I feel like this is another palette, it's really great for beginners as well. So I would still recommend it. It's just for what me and what I look for, I probably would not repurchase this again. This next palette is the oldest palette in my collection, and I haven't touched this in a long time, but It's so sentimental. The original Urban Decay Naked. This is such a bomb palette, or at least it was. I would be very curious to try this again in like a new palette, you know what I mean? Just to see if I still enjoy the formula, but man, I went through this shade. Like, there is quite a dent in the shade Virgin, but this was such a great starter palette. I thought it was so incredibly easy to use. I would be curious though, if I were to buy it, if I would still use it to this day. I remember the formula being fantastic back in the day, but my preferences have changed so much. And this, to me, it doesn't really speak to me anymore, but I still hang on to it because it's very sentimental to me. I love this palette. It's just, it's so cool to see like all of the palettes now versus this one. This was like the only palette back in the day. Again, I feel like everybody had this, but it holds a very special place in my heart, so I refuse to get rid of it. The next palette is the KKW times Mario palette. This was the very first palette that they did. I bought this like not caring at all if it was actually good. I bought this because I think Mario and KKW, that's like an iconic duo when it comes to the makeup industry, because I feel like they set the standards for so many different techniques and just looks and stuff like that. So when I saw this palette, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't even care if it's good or not. I just wanted to have it. It does have this pop of blue, but I haven't reached for this. It's been a minute since I've reached for this palette. I think it's cute. Like, it doesn't knock my socks off. The quality of it was fine, but I probably should have ranked this lower now that I think about it, because I'm like, I literally have not touched it or had any desire. This would be a palette if it wasn't KKW and Mario. I would probably declutter this just because I never reach for it, but still not a horrible palette, but it's not the best either by any means. The next palette that I have is the Disney Princess and ColourPop palette. This was the very first one that they did. Talk about a neutral color story. I love it. But this palette is shockingly really good, especially the shade Thingamabob. I have swatched this silver so many times. Now, I don't have much luck with ColourPop, but that sold me this palette. But the metallics in this palette I think are incredible, but the mattes are not my favorite, but it's still a good neutral color story. I just don't really have much luck or much excitement when it comes to ColourPop, but the main reason that I bought this palette was because it was like a Disney princess vibe. So this next palette is the Nabla Side by Side. I have not tried this yet, but I rank this in the middle. One, because I haven't tried it, but two, I think this has a perfect variety of what people would look for. This also did rank a little bit lower. Like, I expected this to rank higher, but the metallics in this palette aren't what I know from another palette that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So this I feel like is a more wearable palette, like it's a little bit more subtle, toned down, but I like how it's got the mixture of warm tones, almost like mauvey berry tones, but then you also have the cool tones. I think this has a really great variety, and I'm only assuming that the quality of the mattes are equivalent to what I've tried in the other palette, so take this one with a grain of salt just because I haven't actually used it on my eyes. But the fact that it hasn't like screamed my name to try it, and it's a newer palette for me, that kind of does say something as well. But I thought that this was a great price because I did get this in the Trend Mood box. So for the price that I got it for, I wasn't mad at all, because this is usually like a $48 palette, and I got the whole Trend Mood box with this collection for that same price. So I'm still happy that I own it. It's just I haven't tried it yet. And then the next palette is the One Size by Patrick Starr. I thought this was like an okay palette. Like, it's good. I'm glad that I own it. I was really surprised to see this recently on sale for like $21. That was a deal on this palette, because if you're looking for a neutral color story with like the pops of green and even the pop of blue and like lavender, for the most part though, I feel like this is a warm tone neutral palette. This is really great quality though. I haven't reached for it much, but I think for somebody that just wants a basic palette with not really intense shimmers or anything like that, because his metallics in this palette aren't really mind-blowing to me. I feel like the mattes blend out really nicely. I really like these green shades in here as well. But I feel like it was a really good thing he added those eye poppers into his collection, because they can really amp up the look. So as far as formula-wise, I think this is a great palette. It's just the metallics aren't what I expected them to be. I guess like with Patrick Starr, I envision them being like super metallic and blinding. But but it makes sense that they're not just because he had those other products. But especially if you got this palette for 21 bucks on sale, I thought that was a great price for that palette. And then the next palette that I have is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam. This is still one of my favorites in my collection. I think the formula is wonderful. It's just I don't reach for it that much. Like ever since I got these other palettes, I just don't really reach for it. But this is a more warm tone neutral palette for me. And it's even got the pops of burgundies in there as well. I just think this is a really flattering palette for me and my eyes when I want a more warm tone color story. And then right behind it, I actually have the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry. So for these two, I think it's all about what you are looking for as far as your color story. So if you want something that's warm toned, I would go for Soft Glam. If you want something that's cool toned, I would go for Sultry. I love this packaging. I think it's so beautiful. But this color story is stunning. You've got the pop of coral, which I think makes it look a little bit more universal because that coral could basically add warmth to this cool tone palette. So I really, really love this. I was so glad that they brought it back for the holiday this year, but this color story is beautiful. I think the metallics in here are so incredibly beautiful. It's a really nice palette. It's not my favorite of all time, but when I'm reaching for a cool tone palette, I would reach for this 100%. And then right behind that, we're going to stay with Anastasia Beverly Hills because I feel like for the most part, their formula is pretty consistent when it comes to the palettes that are in these types of shapes. But the Master by Mario palette, this is the best palette that I've tried from Anastasia Beverly Hills. I think the formula is great. I love this color story. You're going to see me talk about another palette later that I absolutely love that resembles this. This was just such a good palette, especially for neutrals. It's, I would say, more warm, but it still leans a little bit cool too. I wish that they would bring this back because this was such a good palette. Oh my gosh, this was one I feel like so many people are disappointed that they didn't buy it, but the Master by Mario palette is incredible. And then the next one is the Nabla Cutie Platinum palette. Now for this palette, I wasn't expecting too much, but this silver, what's with me in silvers, but this silver is the most blinding silver I think in my collection. It's insane. The only thing that I would change about this was I wish that there was a slightly lighter matte. Like I feel like I could have done without the gold and then have like a lighter version of this just so you could build like the definition, you know what I mean? So I feel like for the price of this palette though and the quality of the shadows that you're getting, this is an Italian based indie brand. I think that this palette was incredible. And then these metallics, the metallics in this palette are what sell this to me, but that's what I was saying about the side by side. I feel like the metallics are better in these mini palettes versus the side by side palette. That's just at least by me just touching them, swatching them. But I still think that this is a great palette. It's a great price point as well. Really, really cute palette, and I've been really enjoying that one. The next palette is the Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette. First of all, this packaging was fire. This was the best packaging I think they've ever done on one of these palettes. But the color story in this, I feel like you're seeing a lot of shiny metallics. You see the pops of color, but I still feel like this strikes me as a neutral palette. You guys let me know if you think I'm wrong there. But I love the metallics in this palette. I think they're so blinding, so shiny. I just really, really enjoyed this palette. I feel like this is the best palette that Too Faced has done in my opinion, at least for the palettes that I've purchased myself. But they're so, so pretty. Oh my god, the shade Rich Girl. Oh my god, so, so nice. Again, this was my favorite palette that Too Faced has done. This is a palette though I would only consider purchasing though if I was looking for a lot of metallics. The next palette is the Natasha Denona Glam palette. And this is another one if you're looking for a cool tone color story. This is just stunning. It's such a stunning palette. It just gives me like Hollywood vibes. These are so, oh my god. What stands out to me with Natasha's palettes though is her formula. That's why this one did rank higher than the Sultry palette. Like I love the Sultry palette, but if I was to recommend a cool tone palette, I would rank this higher just because I think the formula is so nice. I mean, I do think that they offer two different things. Like, I love the fact that the Sultry has that pop of color, but I love the formula of this more. I really, really love Natasha's formula, so I had to rank this higher than the Sultry. But, I mean, they're both fantastic, so that's where rankings is nice because it's fun to see, like, what the number one palette is. But it really comes down to, like, what are you actually looking for in your palettes? So the next one, this is actually what's on my eyeballs today. This is the new Give Me Glow Sweet and Sticky palette. And this is what I'm talking about for my metallics. I love how blinding, like these are blinding metallics. I want blinding, shiny metallics. The only thing is I would strongly recommend applying your eyeshadow first when you use Give Me Glow. I do find that I have to almost like manipulate my shadows a little bit differently with these because they're so pigmented. I feel like these work better when you just kind of place them and don't really blend them. But for the look that I got today, I think it's a great price, great quality products, and the pan sizes are insanely huge. But you do get the fallout, so I would recommend doing your face first. But I think like the packaging's super cute. Everything's really nice about this so far, so that's why I kind of threw it a little bit higher because I really like the quality and it really fits what I look for. But it's not going to rank any higher because there's other palettes that I just like more than that one. The next palette is the Natasha Denona, the Mini Nude palette. I think if you're looking for a great travel-friendly, day-to-day neutral palette, this is the one that I would strongly recommend. This broke. I'm so devastated about it. But I really love this color story. I think it's a really beautiful, warm tone mini neutral palette. I just really enjoy it, and you're getting high-quality shadows for a really great price point. This is a great stepping stone into trying out Natasha Denona. So other than that, I don't reach for it a ton just because there's other things in my collection that I use over this, but if I travel and I want to use a neutral palette, I would definitely bring this with me. I think it's a great, solid mini palette. This next palette, I don't know if everybody would consider this neutral, but when I look at this, I'm like, I see a lot of neutral, so I'm gonna include it. This is the Lunar Beauty. This is the Eternal Eclipse palette. This is another one that's newer for me, but Lunar Beauty's formula is one of my favorites. And I love this. This is a neutral color story. You've got the bottom row is basically like your grays and blues. It's so beautiful though. If I had used this more, this probably would have ranked higher. But there's other palettes that I've used more that I'm ranking higher. But this one, I still feel like this is such a solid palette. The only shade that I wasn't really wowed by was Flare because it's very subtle and toned down. But his metallics, I just think that they're so special when you put them on your eyes. Like, they don't really swatch the best, but on your eyes, they look so just multi-dimensional and just flattering and really just, like, right in your face. They just really stand out. I think that they're beautiful, and the packaging on this is so stunning. I love that palette. I'm so glad that I picked that up. The next one is the Wayne Goss, the Luxury Eye Palette in the shade Imperial Topaz. Now, this one's ranking much higher because I love the fact that this is a face palette for me as well. So I could use this as my eyeshadows and my face palette. I might even consider ranking this higher, but this is where I'm going to place it for today because I don't use it a ton because of all the palettes that I have, but I am so impressed with the looks that I get whenever I use this palette because I just think there's something so spectacular about Wayne's eyeshadows. I love the packaging. It's super sleek. I do wish that there were some differences between them so it's a little bit easier to tell the difference between the shadows because, I mean, it is kind of hard to read the stickers on the back of the silver packaging, but that's just me being nitpicky. I love this palette though. I've done dedicated videos to this. It's such a beautiful luxury eyeshadow palette. This next palette, I've only used this once as well, but I know these palettes are so expensive, but I just think the quality of the Scott Barnes shadows is incredible. I do wish that there was a little bit more coolness within the mattes, but the look that I got with this palette a couple days ago, I gotten so many compliments on it. I just think that the shadow quality for Scott Barnes and pretty much like all of his products, like I know they're more expensive, but if you can catch them on sale, I do think that they're worth it because the quality of his stuff is really great. And these metallics down here, these remind me a lot of Lunar Beauty as far as like when you swatch them, you're like, okay, they're cute, but it's when you put them on your eyes, they just look incredible. And I just feel like this gives me like supermodel vibes as well. I don't know what it is that's so special about his stuff, but the packaging, you guys know if you've been watching my channel, I don't love his packaging, especially for the price point. If his price point was a little bit lower, I do think it is like high quality packaging, but for a luxury price point, I do want to see better packaging. But the color story though, and the formula, it's so nice and it's effortless. It's really user-friendly. I am really enjoying that palette. I think I might surprise people with this next one because I think a lot are gonna expect this to be my number one, but I'm gonna put the Artist Couture Supreme Nudes in the number 3 spot. This I think is such a wonderful neutral color story / eyeshadow palette. I just think this palette is so beautiful, especially for the metallics that are in here. I wish he would do more shades like the shade Opulence. This is the type of metallic that I love. It's so shiny, so reflective. It's really flattering on the lids. But even the shade Supreme, that's another one of my favorites in my collection. I just think this is such a solid warm tone palette. I freaking love it. I feel like a lot of people have purchased this from my recommendation because I'm always talking about that palette. But I have to rank it lower than my Sydney Grace eyeshadows because I just think the formula on these are incredible. I have not tried the Enduring Love palette, so I'm kind of grouping Enduring Love and Tiny Marvels into one. But I look at this palette and it totally screams neutral. I just haven't reached for it enough to really give my solid feedback on everything. But when I look at this color story, I know the formula of Sydney Grace is incredible. But the Tiny Marvels palette, I've used the shit out of this. And it's honestly one of the best palettes in my entire collection. Between the formula, the color story, this one to me just doesn't scream neutral as much as the Enduring Love. So Sydney Grace I highly recommend, but I have to put my Makeup Geek Matrix Neutral Palette in first place because I am such a Makeup Geek bitch, okay? I'm proud to admit I love me some Makeup Geek. This to me is the best neutral palette, especially it's all matte. I find myself becoming more and more of a fan of single shadows because then I can customize my palettes to make them look exactly the way that I want them to. Why I love this so much though is because the whole entire concept is so smart. It's so smart, it's so well thought out, and I feel like the shades in this collection are pure perfection. Like the only thing that this palette is missing is a black, which Makeup Geek does offer a black eyeshadow, but this shade right here, I mean, it's damn near close. I just think this is the best neutral palette. I absolutely love it. Like if I was to freelance, this would be the palette that I would bring with me all the time because I just feel like the tones are perfection. Like I don't feel like this could have been done any better. I think it's incredible. The formula of Makeup Geek shadows is my favorite. My favorite formula of all time are the Makeup Geek mattes. I feel like Sydney Grace and Makeup Geek are very, very similar as far as formula goes, but it's this color story. It's just all those things that I mentioned that I love about it. It's all those things compiled into one that makes it rank the #1 spot. So that is going to be all of my neutral palettes ranked. I mean, some of them could easily be like thrown into different spots, but I feel like for the most part, my top ones are my top ones and I don't really foresee that changing. So we'll see if anything comes out that replaces one or the other in the future. But I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Thank you so much to Morgan for collabing with me on this video. And now guys, go run over there and shower her with all the Britches love and let her know that I sent you. And please subscribe to her channel because she's truly an incredible content creator and she's just so kind and so sweet. I strongly recommend Morgan Turner's channel. So thank you again to Morgan and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!